Kevin McCarthy passed yesterday, got his legislation passed out of the House of Representatives. He only had 4 Republicans who voted against it. Otherwise, it was a party line vote. And those 4 who voted against it did so because they thought it didn't go far enough. There are actually several members of the Sedition Caucus who want to crash us into a second Republican Great Depression. They think it'll teach those Democrats a lesson. So the legislation that McCarthy got passed, this is a summary from a tweet by Eric Swalwell, by the way, that I retweeted last night, I believe it was. If you want to just check my timeline, you can easily find, or go to Eric Swalwell's if you follow him on Twitter. But here are the things that Kevin McCarthy wants, and all of the Republicans in the House want, with the exception of 4 who want even more, in exchange for raising the debt ceiling so that the federal government can resume paying its bills. They want to kick low-income Americans off Medicaid by imposing stringent work requirements. They want to cut the state opioid response grant program, denying 29,000 people recovery services. They want to provide veterans with 13 million fewer health care visits and longer wait times for benefits. They want to cut 200,000 children from Head Start and 100,000 children from child care assistance. They want to decrease higher education aid to all 6 million Pell Grant recipients and eliminate Pell Grants altogether for about 80,000 people. They want to make communities less safe by cutting support for 60 local law enforcement agencies, cutting funding for several hundred officers, decreasing FBI personnel by approximately 11,000, and freezing hiring of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They want to cut the green energy tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act, which will drive up energy costs and make it harder to develop clean energies like wind, solar, and energy-efficient vehicles. They want to decrease assistance to small businesses, resulting in 125,000 fewer entrepreneurs and small businesses. They want to deny 750,000 workers job training and employment services, resulting in 100,000 fewer workers gaining a registered apprenticeship. And they want to cut more than 1 million seniors from Meals on Wheels and over 1 million mothers and children from WIC, the Nutritional Assistance Program. And they want to make permanent Donald Trump's tax cuts for billionaires. This is what they want in exchange for raising the debt ceiling. But as I point out today in my op-ed over at HartmannReport.com titled "Kevin McCarthy Wants a Debt Ceiling Depression, Will SCOTUS Give It to Him?" This is all based on a law that was passed in 1917. It was called the Second Liberty Bond Act. Now, in 1917, we were in or preparing to get into, I'd have to go back and look, World War I. And this was to help us fight World War I. It was the federal government was going to sell these Liberty bonds to the public as a way of raising money for the war effort. And so this act of Congress authorized Congress to sell these bonds, but put a limit on how many bonds could be sold. In other words, how much money the government could borrow from the citizens of the United States. That debt limit then became, this institution. But nobody really paid attention to this at all. It was routinely raised. It was raised like 18 times when Reagan was president. It was routinely raised right up until 1995 with the Gingrich Revolution. And Newt Gingrich found out about this, or somebody pointed it out to him or whatever, and he said, hey, we can use this as a club to beat Democrats over the head. And he did. He got Bill Clinton to end welfare as we know it by threatening to crash the entire United States economy if Clinton didn't go along with this to raise the debt ceiling. The same thing happened in 2011 when Barack Obama was president. They didn't force us into default, but Obama gave them some concessions at the last minute, and they walked us right up to the edge of default, which led to a downgrade in our credit rating, which cost average American working families $2.3 trillion in wealth and income. Didn't cost the billionaires anything. The stock market tanked, and billionaires do great when the stock market goes down because that turns it into a buying opportunity. Anybody who's got cash, depressions and recessions are great for people who are really, really rich because then they can just buy everything in sight because everything's on fire sale, right? It's a bargain. So I think this is why, a number of these Republicans, because their principal beneficiaries are billionaires, are saying, hey, it's okay if we crash the economy, no problem. Well, this 1917 act that put the debt ceiling on, in my humble opinion, and frankly that of a number of constitutional scholars, is actually unconstitutional. And here's why. Section 4 of the 14th Amendment, which was passed right after the Civil War, and the reason that they wrote Section 4 into the 14th Amendment was because after the Civil War, there was some doubt that America could actually pay its bills, both nationally and internationally. There was concern about this. Abraham Lincoln had borrowed a crap load of money to pay for the Civil War, and people were concerned that it wouldn't be paid back. So the 14th Amendment, Section 4 says, and I quote, "The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned." Now, the debt ceiling is obviously questioning the national debt, right? It says you can't pay these bills that you've already incurred. And in fact, this has already been before the Supreme Court. In 1935, there was a case called Perry versus the United States. Mr. Perry was a guy who had bought a $10,000 Liberty bond, authorized by the Liberty Bond Act back in 1917. And when it came time to turn it in, because back then everything was could be converted into gold, and in 1935, in June of 1935, Franklin Roosevelt basically froze the price of gold. And so what this guy was saying was, I want not just my $10,000 plus interest, I want an additional $7,000 to account for the fact that the price of gold has gone down. Now, you probably didn't need to know all that minutia, but just FYI. And so Perry sues the government. The case was called Perry v. U.S., and it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says, and I quote, and they're talking about this thing that, the joint resolution of June 5th, 1933 is a direct violation of Section 4 of the 14th Amendment, expressly limiting the delegated powers of Congress and making the public debt of the United States inviolable in the hands of Congress. Now, making it inviolable, it shall not be violated. What they mean is that, it's kind of a badly written sentence. What they mean is that the 14th Amendment, Section 4 of the 14th Amendment says you may not violate the sovereign debt of the United States. And in the actual body of the decision, that was from the syllabus, but in the actual body of the decision itself, the Supreme Court writes, Congress was free to reduce gratuities deemed excessive, but Congress was without power to reduce expenditures by abrogating contractual obligations of the United States. To abrogate contracts in an attempt to lessen government expenditure would not be the practice of economy, but an act of repudiation. When the United States, with constitutional authority, makes contracts, it has responsibilities similar to those of individuals who are parties to such interests. And, in fact, there's a little more to that I included in my article today. So the simple fact is that Joe Biden could simply call a press conference and say, we're going to keep paying the bills. We're going to ignore the Second Liberty Act, the Second Liberty Bond Act of 1917. We're going to ignore the debt ceiling. We're going to pay the damn bills and sue us. And the Republicans, of course, will sue them. They will take them to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction in disputes between the legislative and executive branches. And then the question becomes, will the Supreme Court crash the economy? Now, under normal circumstances, the court would do the same thing it did in 1935 and say, hey, you cannot violate the debt of the United States. It's right there in the 14th Amendment. It's part of our Constitution. But we have a fairly weird Supreme Court right now. Both Brett Kavanaugh and Clarence Thomas have declared that they intend to seek revenge against Democrats. And Neil Gorsuch and Sam Alito are extremely pissed off with Democrats. So what's going to happen here? I don't know. This has the potential to get really and truly wild. So get some popcorn and buckle up. We will see where this goes. And frankly, Obama was presented by his advisors with the option of doing what I just described. And he decided he didn't want to do that. He was going to let the Republicans play this thing out. Will Biden let the Republicans crash the economy? If so, will we be going into the next election in the midst of a second Republican Great Depression?